Hi, my name's Steve Morse. I'm with Veterans for Peace. Um, Ian and I are both members of the steering committee of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, um, one of the most active parts of Veterans for Peace. Um, I didn't I didn't get briefed that I'd be introducing, so I was going to ask Ian a little more about his military uh, career. I think about 15 years ago you were in Afghanistan. Is that correct? And
Yes.
okay. And Ian's close to getting his PhD at Lexington, Kentucky. He's been active in various ways. He's active in his union. He's active as a um, instigator of students as he teaches them as a TA, and he's he brings a lot of us in our group are a little bit older, and Ian's not as old, and it's very good to have that. He represented us in a conference called Power Shift that was in person in New Orleans about a year and a half ago, and was very impressive. He was the person that brought it was a climate conference. He brought the militarism into that. So I'm going to pass it to Ian.
Thank you so much for that excellent introduction, comrade. Yes, like Steve said, my name is Ian Mooney. I'm a PhD student at the University of Kentucky, where I study Marxist and anarchist political theory. And today I will be presenting on behalf of the Climate Change and Militarism Project a little presentation that I call Critical Perspectives on Gaza. The first time I gave this presentation was about 5 months after the events of October 7th, 2023. And now it's been over a year later, and over 44,000 people have been killed in the settler state of Israel's ongoing genocide, over 16,000 of whom were children. Originally, the purpose of this presentation was to highlight the devastating impact that this ongoing genocide has on Gaza's ecology specifically, and the changing climate in general, and to stress the necessity of an immediate ceasefire. And to be clear, I do think that an immediate ceasefire is beyond necessary. However, as the inhumanity of this conflict continues to unfold, and the possibility of civil life in Gaza seems almost completely removed, I think that now is the time to consider this conflict from a different perspective. The recent re-election of Donald Trump has led to some soul searching amongst establishment Democrats. A common sight these days is to see aspersions cast upon those who spurned the Democrats for their failure to meaningfully address Israel's genocidal assault. The accusation is that those who took a hard line against supporting genocide failed to see the bigger political stakes because they were blinded by purity politics. But perhaps this disillusionment with business as usual represents an opportunity for progressive politics rather than a disclosure. A part of what makes the ongoing genocide in Gaza such a political abyss here in the United States is because all the violence which the settler state of Israel perpetrates ties directly to US economic and foreign policy. The US political establishment foments Israel's belligerence and benefits from it. In this presentation, I will begin with a close look at the impact of war on Gaza's climate, specifically how Gaza became rubble and what all of that rubble means for Gaza as an environment. Then I'll discuss a few of the tools that have brought Gaza to a state of rubble. And this is where Israel's relationship to the United States will come to the fore. And I'll close this presentation by reflecting a little bit on that relationship. Uh, so here's a look at Gaza now. Gaza is a site of immense rubble. Israeli airstrikes have decimated buildings, leaving much of Rafah and other metropolitan centers in the occupied territory little more than toppled masses of concrete, hiding scores of bodies, some of which will never be found, as well as numerous other toxic chemicals and dangerous waste products. Concrete can be recycled. It can be broken down and turned into other aggregate materials, but that requires a lot of infrastructure. Unless the rubble is going to be hauled somewhere, and that means additional fuel resources are being consumed for transportation, then the machinery needs to be operated at the location of the rubble. This means there has to be engineering equipment and know-how available to spontaneously establish these kinds of projects. And as you can see from these pictures, that capacity has been taken away from Gaza. Outside help could be brought in to facilitate these kinds of projects, but, and this is speculation, I think that given the attitude that the settler state of Israel has displayed so far towards allowing aid and reconstruction efforts into Gaza, that we should not expect this to manifest anytime soon. But the other option would be to landfill this material. This runs into similar problems from recycling. It would have to be transported. That transportation will cost a lot of money because there's a lot of rubble, and it would take up space that could be filled by other kinds of waste. There's neither the fuel, nor the materiel, nor the landfill space in Gaza to support this, so the rubble would have to go somewhere far away from where it currently is. And for all the same reasons that recycling seems unlikely, so does transportation to outside landfills. But there's one other option which circumvents all of these concerns. Could just be dumped into the ocean. The destiny of much of the rubble from both Libya and Syria was the Mediterranean, so this would follow the usual method for post-conflict cleanup in the region. And since other options come with such higher costs in terms of manpower and treasure, we should at least be willing to entertain that much of what we see here in this image and those to follow is headed towards the sea, where it will blight the marine environment there for lifetimes. In this slide, we are already looking at a catastrophe of concrete, all of this. Once the bones of homes and workplaces, schools and hospitals is now ruins and waste. The mangled bodies of their former inhabitants festering inside. And all of this is likely headed for the sea, excluding the tanks and the aircraft and the drones and all the generators fueling Israel's genocidal retaliation. The rubble alone produced by this conflict is a massive waste. The International Panel on Climate Change, that's the most official group of climate authorities, they said last year that Earth's temperatures are past the point of no return. Right now, we're in the climate catastrophe. The planet is going to get hotter, and weather patterns are going to grow increasingly unpredictable. The Earth cannot and is not sustaining this conflict. This year, the Southeast United States and the Caribbean were hit by record numbers of unusually powerful hurricanes during an unusually long season. The climate is changing now. We are now in the climate change disaster. And this concrete rubble harbors asbestos and oil. It's covered with carcinogens like trichloroethylene and white phosphorus, the results of an unrelenting aerial bombing campaign. All of these chemicals are seeping into the soil in Gaza and affecting its aquifers and rivers, guaranteeing that for decades, if not centuries to come, this land will be blighted and toxic. Unlike the rubble, the effects of that toxicity cannot be remotely quantified. Even if a permanent ceasefire were declared now or months ago, the people of Gaza would be returning to a place where all of life, the land itself, is contaminated. Since October 7th, Israel has directly assaulted the Al Ali Arab Hospital, the Indonesian Hospital, the Al Quds Hospital, the Al Amal Hospital, the Turkish Palestinian Friendship Hospital, the Jordan Field Hospital, the Al Auda Hospital, the Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani Hospital, and the Al Shifa Hospital, the largest in Gaza City, was destroyed and no longer treats patients. Israel has blocked aid from coming into Gaza, seizing control of the Rafah border with Egypt. And I don't personally put much faith in the sanctity of international law, but for what it's worth, it's completely illegal to take over another country's border as though it were your own. This is a violation of the national sovereignty of both Gaza and Egypt. Israeli invading forces have directly targeted and assassinated people trying to get access to airdropped aid. Israeli forces have directly targeted ambulance, journalists, children, aid workers, mosques, churches, schools, and refugee camps. Israeli airstrikes have dropped more than 25,000 tons of bombs in Gaza. That is more destructive power than 2 nuclear bombs. The contaminants and heavy metals in those bombs are seeping into Gaza's soil and its already scarce water resources. Healthcare is over in Gaza. There's only triage, what little of that there is. Israel's genocidal retaliation is maiming people indiscriminately. The land of Gaza is being disabled. It can no longer foster civil life. The people of Gaza are being disabled, if not outright killed. They are being wounded, traumatized, starved, exposed to filth and disease, and driven from their homes. The number one munition most responsible for all this devastation that I have showed you so far is the AGM-114 air-to-surface ordnance, aka the Hellfire missile. Here's a rhetorical question. Can you guess where this weapon is manufactured? That's right, it's the United States. The Hellfire missile is made out of plants in both Florida and Alabama by none other than the illustrious Lockheed Martin Incorporated. There's also the AGM-88 HARM, that's the top left missile. That's made by Northrop Grumman. And the AGM-65 Maverick, that's bottom left by Northrop Grumman Industries. Sorry, the Maverick was made by Raytheon. And of course, this list would be incomplete without mentioning Boeing. Boeing manufactures a loathsome piece of technology called the JDAM. That's on the right picture there, which stands for Joint Direct Attack Munition. This is a sophisticated computerized system that guides otherwise unguided munitions, making them much more lethal. Unguided munitions, such as the MK80 used by Israel, manufactured in Garland, Texas by General Dynamics. 78% of all of the settler ethno-state of Israel arms come through sales from US weapon manufacturers. That is billions of dollars every year. Israeli war crimes are a significant driver of the US economy as a whole. It is not simply the United States, that is, that the outgoing democratic establishment did little or nothing to advance a ceasefire. Throughout all of that intransigence, blood turned into dollars, and those dollars went right into the pockets of the war profiteers who run the aforementioned companies. Smedley Butler was right. War is a damn racket. And do not think for an instant that Gaza is a new phenomenon for the US military industrial complex. As Steve mentioned, I'm a veteran. I was ordered to serve 14 months at war in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2010, and that war was also a racket. Allow me to draw your attention to the Task Force for Business and Stability Operations, aka the TFBSO. This task force was created directly by the Pentagon under the supervision of arch war criminal General David Petraeus in 2006 as an effort to stabilize economic processes in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, the United States was not the first nation to intervene in Afghan politics on a mass scale. Occupation by the Soviet Union began in 1979 and lasted the better part of a decade, during which the Soviet Union did an incredible job of mapping the mineral and resource deposits across the country. The TFBSO took those maps and created a network of mines across Afghanistan, overseen and managed directly by US Special Forces groups, which sold resources to US business interests. These mines were run through contract, often with the Taliban, and conducted what came to be termed artisanal mining practices, which simply meant that they were completely unregulated. Contractors used child and slave labor and utilized drastically unsafe mining practices, such as mining deposits with direct artillery fire, aerosolizing as many minerals as were extracted. In the case of chromium, this is especially dangerous because it's a major carcinogen. And chromium is necessary to make stainless steel, which is an essential element in missiles and other arms. And this is just one of the perfidious hustles that TFBSO undertook. There's also the matter of our gargantuan natural gas fueling station and pipeline, which was funded but unfinished, and the entire litany of larcenies which they oversaw in Iraq, which is too long for this presentation. War is a sophisticated enterprise for the United States military industrial complex. Many mouths get fed from it. Just this year, These arms manufacturers spent over $110 million on congressional lobbying. Recently, over 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas was discovered off of the coast of Gaza. That's a big business opportunity for the TFBSO. People are profiting from this crisis, a lot of profit. All of that money goes through the Pentagon and the State Department. Allow me to revisit the issue I brought up at the beginning of this presentation. This slide is showing you a portion of the amount of money that just Boeing spent on lobbying this year. As you can see, they are supporting both candidates, both parties, Harris and Trump. There is no reason to trust that either party is committed to drawing down the intense horror of the Israeli genocide in Gaza. This conflict is no longer limited even to Gaza. Now, the settler ethno-state of Israel is issuing evacuation orders to civilians in Lebanon, raining down US-made missiles on their homes and hospitals. Israel is launching US-made missiles into Iran. Israel and its benefactors in the US military-industrial complex are driving headlong into a regional conflict that could lead to nothing short of catastrophe. If a citizen of the United States were at all motivated by a desire to see the end of this wretched genocide, why would they vote for either of these parties? Let me take this moment to refocus on the practices of that the Israeli military employs in its current campaigns. I mentioned just now that the Israeli military issues evacuation orders in southern Lebanon. These kinds of orders have also been given to civilians throughout Gaza. They are not meant to safeguard lives, nor to give people any kind of fair warning. Often the orders are issued mere moments before artillery fire begins or air raids commence. The purpose is to redesignate. After that order is given, the Israeli military acts as though any who remain in the area do so out of allegiance or sympathy to terrorist enemy cells. These evacuation orders are the opening salvo in military maneuvers that eliminate the possibility of civilian life in the area. Israel conducts relentless bombing and artillery campaigns, decimating urban landscapes, as we have seen. These pollute and corrupt the soil and the water of the region. It eviscerated the infrastructure necessary to support civil society, and they deny the residents of these places the very political right to identify as a civilian. They are ordered to leave everything behind that they own, their entire livelihood, or else be considered a combatant. In their own homes, a combatant. In their schools, in their churches, mosques, hospitals, anywhere, a combatant. The Israeli military has blighted Gaza's climate so seriously that civil life can no longer grow there, neither materially nor even conceptually. Civilians are extinct in Gaza. They are becoming so in Lebanon, and soon perhaps also Iran. And civility in the settler ethno-state of Israel are no less at risk. The Israeli state practices conscription. In addition to violating any notion of autonomy, being a conscript is not the same as being a civilian. And now they are surrounded by hostility and suffering under aerial bombardment as well. Everyone living in Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, and the liminal spaces between and around are now all targets, terrorists, soldiers, hostages, refugees, human shields, and civilians. None. US citizens should be outraged by this. They should feel indignant to their core about the United States' complicity, their active abetting of this apocalyptic state of affairs. And consider this. This is a face that should all be familiar to us. This is Eisenhower Ejgi Egi. She was a psychology graduate of my alma mater, the University of Washington, and she was raised in the Seattle area. She was assassinated by an Israeli sniper, shot in the head during a lull in protests. That is, they were not actively antagonizing anybody at the time that she was shot. Protests against the settler occupation of the West Bank. She was an American citizen, and since her death, the Democratic administration has done nothing more than call for the Israeli state to take accountability. But the settler in the state of Israel is not accountable for her death, at least not solely. The $12.5 billion in arms and military support, the carte blanche with which Biden's administration provided the Israeli military is also responsible. Eisenhower was killed by an institution which forms the backbone of both parties, the US military industrial complex. It is something which we must oppose completely and unceasingly. No good comes from it. The US military industrial complex is the root cause of the rubble we see in Gaza, the elimination of civil life in the Middle East, and even the death of its own people. It has always been a threat to civil life here in the United States, but that certainty looms closer than ever now. Just 1 month ago, the president-elect said, and I'm quoting, "I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some very sick people, radical left lunatics. I think it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by the National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen. I think it would be arrogant to think that the military would not follow through with orders like these if they were given by the commander-in-chief. It is a pleasant fantasy amongst the liberal establishment that military generals and senior DoD officials can act like adults in the room for Trump's reactionary childishness. But consider what I have brought to the fore in this presentation. The Pentagon is an establishment that uses US military power to contract with the Taliban to bring slave-mined lithium to US businesses to make chips for cell phones. These generals and administrators butter their bread on slavery and exploitation and murder. We must not think of them as responsible leaders, and certainly not like a savior. They are going to be the ones managing mass deportation. They are the ones who are going to be cracking skulls on campus. They are the ones who are going to be managing the domestic migrant crisis as US agriculture collapses after drastic summers, lengthening tornado seasons, and rising sea levels. And people are driven from their homes for lack of available welfare or because they've become uninhabitable. I opened this presentation by claiming that we should think of US disaffection with the Democrat Party differently. Hell, we should think of political disaffection in general differently. People are correct to find establishment politics revolting. The US economy is built on top of blood and slavery, and it is cooking the planet. No one should feel like it's tolerable. Is it going to motivate progressive politics if we are demanding that people hold their noses and enable the lesser of two evils, especially when that lesser evil is directly backing the horrible crimes I have been describing in this presentation? If we want to organize for climate justice, or justice for the crimes of genocide, or justice for indigenous people, or minoritized people, or even housing justice, healthcare justice, all of that would require active opposition to the US military industrial complex. It is a waste of money. It is a waste of precious resources. It is a massive waste of life and human effort, and it destroys the planet and impedes progressive policy in return. The US military industrial complex does not protect us, it endangers us. If we want to see this country turn away from reactionary politics, then I think we should be willing to take this disaffection on its own terms and stoke it rather than snuff it out. The military has been a weapon brought to bear against we, the people. And in the coming years, that is likely to grow more dire. We should be actively encouraging people to oppose US militarization and call for major reforms in the political establishments which support it. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you for your support, Steve.
So I was here a year ago under the same circumstances with Vince Dionich, who was going to be here, but he's sick. So he was going to be here today. Janet Wheel was here last year. She wasn't going to be here. Um, do you want to do questions now? Or you? Oh, he's collecting questions. Yeah, yeah. Is that okay? Yeah, and then we'll do questions for both of us, I guess. So I do want to. I was in the Army from 69 to 71, but my purpose in being in there was to be part of the resistance movement, which has kind of been airbrushed out of history because it's pretty threatening to know how much that resistance movement helped stop the war and that there were 300 underground papers going at the time. Um, I was talking to John about this and Bruce Newberger here, and who was also a dissident a couple of years prior. And I could talk about that after this program. I'll stick around if anybody wants to talk about that. Um, but in terms of dissidents, I do want to say that the Israeli soldiers are, um, soldiers have breaking points and they get broken, and then they also refuse to do things. So Israeli soldiers are going to already experience trauma, PTSD, moral injury, however you want to look at it. 130, about a month ago, 130 reservists said they weren't going to serve until there was a ceasefire or until the hostages were back, which really requires a ceasefire. Then 35 more have added on to that. There's some of them are not showing up. So that's hopeful. But we've got to think of soldiers and people in the military as not necessarily continuing to carry out orders, because that's the history in our country and in other countries. So let me shift a little, talk about climate. So Ian and I are on the steering committee of Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, one of the most active projects within Veterans for Peace. We formed it in 2020, and our purpose really was that in the climate, well, within Veterans for Peace, we wanted to bring climate into the picture, but it was also true that many of the chapters had taken it up already. And we have found that within the peace movement that a lot of people are already addressing climate. It was a little harder. The other part of it was that within the climate movement, we were going to try to bring militarism put it on the table, bring it into the picture. And that's what we've been working on. We've had some success. We're working some with 350.org around military air shows. I'll say a little more about that later. But I want to say some of the just go down some of the effects, some of the climate effects of the military, both direct and indirect. So if you think of direct emissions, they're considered to be about 5.5% of total greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. But that's direct. But then indirect includes all kinds of things. It includes the energy required to grow the food that soldiers eat. It includes transportation. It includes the carbon effect of building these weapons that Ian showed you on the slide there. So that's one thing, but it's not. It doesn't stop there. Another thing is the huge resources that go to the military. The Pentagon budget is as large as the next 10 countries combined military. That's the Pentagon budget. That's about $900 billion per year. However, if you count the interest on national debt that is attributable to the military, then you've got another 400 billion. And you count veterans expenses, which we support. We support healing for veterans, but it's a lot of money. It's maybe a couple hundred billions. We're up to $1.5 trillion, which is really It's really what the rest of the world spends on military put together, the US. And that's just taking, as you know, that's taking away from everything else, health, education, social needs, all that. But another thing is that the military, a lot of the role of the US military, and Ian showed this, that it is to support US corporate power for fossil fuels. Ian mentioned mining in Afghanistan, and we can think of fossil fuels, war for oil. This is a protection. The military is serving as a protection racket for oil companies, and they don't pay. We pay. It's completely taxpayer funded, the military. And then another thing relates to what Ian was showing is he showed very, very well the environmental effects of what was happening in Gaza. And if you just consider the climate effects, then there's still a lot. You know, just rebuilding. He talked about the waste. What do you do with the waste? Okay, but if you're going to rebuild and you have concrete and steel, there's a huge carbon effect from doing that. So all those things need to be addressed, and we're trying to address them. But part of the reason they haven't been addressed is because starting in the Kyoto conference of 19 climate conference, one of the early ones, 1997, the U.S. kind of strong-armed the world to say military emissions will be exempt from being reported. So there's really been very little or most military emissions of any country, but the U.S. wanted it for U.S. emissions. So it's been hard to find the information on that. It hasn't gotten out. And also it's hard to address militarism in the US. So we try to do that. I'm just going to say a couple of other things areas that we're working. I have some literature back on the table. You can check it out. Our brochure, two editions of our brochure. This is air shows. We've been working on military air shows, really, particularly in San Diego. Our group down there, Gary Butterfield, has been working on it for 8 years. And what he found was in the last couple of years that by focusing on climate more than militarism, it actually brought more people in it. He brought in 18 climate groups because the military air shows, among other things, are kind of flaunting exhaust. If you ever see them, Blue Angel, you see all that exhaust coming out. Well, so the climate people have gotten on board. And also, in this last year, we've gotten to about 6 different cities, starting from San Diego, Seattle, Annapolis, and here, San Francisco. But we didn't, about a month ago, we had a smallish demonstration down by the ferry building. But we're going to try to really build a campaign over a longer period of time. So I invite you to be part of that. There's many reasons to be opposed to the Blue Angels, from sort of traumatizing people that have been in war, and just the general noise problem, and the money spent, and the climate effects. So that's that. I'm going to also just mention one thing I'm involved in Veterans for Peace. It's kind of connected with the climate project that we're doing, but it's Veterans and Labor for Sensible Priorities. I'm a retired union member, sheet metal worker, and we have people. I'm working with people who are very active in U.S. labor against the war about 20 years ago, and they got many unions to oppose the Iraq war starting in 2003, and the AFL-CIO actually came out against the Iraq war in the 2005 at their convention, which was a big shift from the top AFL-CIO supporting the Cold War for many years, George Mooney and Lane Kirkland. And so that's a shift. So we've got 36 unions and labor groups that have signed on to $100 billion reduction in Pentagon budget. People over Pentagon, it's called. And we continue to work on that. We don't expect it to pass, but we're we didn't expect it to pass in the last Congress. It didn't even get brought up, or in the next Congress. But we're trying to build support within labor, bring militarism onto the table. Within Veterans for Peace, I'm trying to bring labor into the mix more. But one thing we're trying to do also is within the climate movement, there has been not so much around.
You want to bring the chair over?
Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't get you. Okay. Within the climate movement, there has started to be more attention to just transition, meaning that workers in the fossil fuel industry don't get thrown under the bus if we actually can change to a more green economy, but get equivalent jobs, union jobs, good paying jobs, and or retraining and or early retirement, things like that. So this is a matter of justice, and it's also a matter of the fact that unions will oppose it if that's not, if their members are going to be thrown under the bus. So that's that. So the climate movement is moving more toward addressing that, but we're trying to also bring in workers in the war industries who, in the same way that they not get thrown under the bus, that they get good jobs, and there's interest there. The two big industries in the war industries are the UAW, United Auto Workers, and the machinists, and they both made endorsements of ceasefire, along with, as part of 11 unions that did that, representing the majority of U.S. unionized workers. So there's a possibility there to move forward in that way, and certainly to just whether we can make it happen very soon in the national government. That's we've got other things to deal with that, and but to build interest around that, to build awareness around that, to build movement and energy is very important, because we're in it for the long haul. I think we can see from the election that we're going to be having to work on issues for rest of our lives, I guess. So anyway, with that, I'll stop, and questions, sure.
Microphone is on. Good. We have lots of questions, and they're kind of in different categories. We have some that relate to the ecological impacts of the war, some to the military and militarism, some relate to the conflict as a whole, because you just spent a lot of time on that, Ian, and some are more like statements. So let me start with the military ones, militarism. If the military were not available for young men and women with all its perks, what possibilities would be available for employment, education, and healthcare which are provided to them by the military today? In other words, why are people going into the military, and are there other alternatives for them?
Well, I can speak to that. The military is having a bit of a recruitment crisis. The military depends on the economy being lousy to get recruiters, working class kids, hold out college and all that kind of stuff. And but if there are jobs available, then it's harder. But I think what I was talking about, just transition, really applies to there are so many things that need doing. Environmental things. Think of the New Deal, all those programs, that Civilian Conservation Corps, Works Progress Administration, all those things. We could do that if we have the political will and the political clout to make that happen.
Someone wrote to you thanking Ian for your presentation. Could you tell us briefly about your military service and how it affected you?
My military service and how it impacted me? My military service was a nightmarish experience that has led me into like an ethical struggle to recover a sense of identity. My military service is something that has like plagued me since leaving, the guilt of having supported such a terrible, terrible enterprise. One of the things that I was asked to do in the military was like tolerate warlords who kept children as sex slaves. The US military is an awful thing. I hated every moment of it and regret being in it for one instant. However, it has motivated me to get politically involved.
Thank you.
Oh, I want to follow up on something that Steve said, actually. Uh, in response to the last question that was asked, so I teach in higher education, and so I deal with a lot of students who are students at this university and members of the military. And I think that everything that Steve said is completely correct. The U.S. military machine really relies on a very exploitative framework. If we had universal healthcare and free education, I think that recruitment would be much different in this country, especially if you had like a universal basic income on top of that. I think that these are necessary first steps towards a better society in general, especially if we want to imagine stepping back from this lead.
During the Vietnam War, there was mass opposition to U.S. militarism. Do you see signs of this happening again?
No.
Sadly.
No, and Steve, if you'll allow me, I want to follow back up on something that Steve mentioned. So Steve mentioned the No Moss project that we've been trying to like work on here. Like this is a like no more military air shows is about eliminating a wasteful practice. It's about eliminating a disruptive practice, like he mentioned. It's also about changing our attitude towards the military. Like any time you watch sports in this country, it's brought to you by the troops. The planes are flying over the stadium. Like so much of popular culture relies on this like glorification of the military. Like this is something that we have to like this idea that hey, you got to support the troops. That's not true. We don't and we shouldn't. And so I don't think that we're going to see people making change in this country until there's more space to sort of question these things that we take for granted.
Please say more about the mindset of generals at the Pentagon. Is it at all possible that the generals will not follow the commander-in-chief's orders to attack U.S. citizens? Any chance they will oppose the commander-in-chief? And I guess I will add that I'm reading that they are appointing someone to defense that is going to purge all the generals who are not loyalists. So that's concerning.
If the question is directed towards me, then I suppose anything is possible. There's always room for surprises. But I mean, like I said, just the things that I described in this presentation, like this is not what good, sane people do. There's no these people are in charge of a massive machine that destroys countries and makes profit. They all know that. They all know that what they do are secure business interests with military power and turn that into domestic economy. Like, I don't think that there's any reason to trust that these people like have our interest in mind. Maybe, I mean, like, you know, they're all military people. They've been military their whole career. Maybe they want more military here. Why not? I'm just saying I wouldn't trust it. And even if there were people who were willing to like stand up or take a stand, the point of the military is that no one person has to be there. You can always move them out and put somebody else in charge, and it'll run just as fine.
It's good. I mean, it's good to try to understand what military people have done in revolutionary situations, for example. I mean, like, for example, in Chile, where in 1973 there was a coup that was orchestrated by the CIA and the Pinochet dictatorship, and the generals were part of that. But there was one general, the main general, Rene Schneider, was not was not on board with the coup, so they got rid of him. And then so it was a military coup. Although in 1988, if you see the movie No, you'll see that vote that Pinochet was trying to get legitimacy, but he lost the vote, and so he needed to be removed. So the generals went down and made sure he left. So that was a good thing. In Portugal in 1974, in the revolution, there was the generals, there was the junior officers, and the enlisted people. The generals were kind of opposed to the Salazar dictatorship, but they played a pretty conservative role, and the enlisted people played a much more radical role in that revolution that ended Portuguese colonialism.
Okay, returning to the ecological impacts, why not turn all war equipment, tanks, etc., into engineering equipment to remove the rubble and rebuild villages for the Palestinians? Further, to do this around the world, wherever the U.S. has created toxic rubble through the war efforts. I see that as the only moral option.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Great idea. Put that person in charge.
Okay. In a conference here, the Building Trades Conference, some years ago, it was said that nearly 50% of greenhouse gases are from buildings and building operations. If we insulated all U.S. buildings and homes, we could cut CO2 by 50%. Is this true? Do you know that? It's not really about the
Do you know
military.
more about this? Yeah.
I don't know
I
that.
I don't know either.
Someone wrote, this is more of a comment, given how small Israel and Palestine is, and I'm paraphrasing the question from Zoom, by decimating the environment of Gaza, aren't they dooming themselves also? Are they planning their own exit from the land, which they're ruining with this devastation?
Yes, it seems to me like they are, but I don't know. That's the thing about rich people, right? Is like I don't necessarily think that once you have that much money, you're really thinking like, oh no, am I destroying the planet? You know, a lot of money can really change how things impact you personally. So you get a little disconnected from the concerns of the hoi polloi. So, I'm sure that somebody knows that they're destroying everything, but as long as the dollars are flowing, I don't think anybody cares.
How about this? How about given the toxicity they're releasing in the environment there, is this fantasy of Jared Kushner to turn Gaza into beachfront condos or something, which we've heard about, could that actually come to pass?
Oh, wouldn't that be something?
Okay. How, when you get your information on the cost of weapons, child slavery in Afghanistan, et cetera, is the Pentagon budget open? Let me see. Is the Pentagon budget open to Citizens Freedom of Information Act? Basically about where you got some of the info in your presentation.
Yeah, excellent question. So maybe Steve can offer more information about this than me. So there has never been a full audit in the history of the Pentagon about its budget. So the money that moves through that place, there's a lot of unknown. Where did I get my information? One of them was from the American Friends Service Committee. This is where I found out about how much like is being spent on lobbying. The Council of Foreign Relations is where I got all the information about how much is being made off of weapons sales to Israel. There's a book by a person named Zach Coplin. That's where I found out all the stuff about the TFBSO. And for the breakdown of lobbying dollars spent, I went to opensecrets.org and a lot of like the specifics on weapon deployment and specifications I just pulled off of Wikipedia. So, I mean, I guess that there's like a veracity problem that could have arisen there, but I trust the sources that I got out of that. But again, just to say, like, to get a clear understanding of how the Pentagon spends its money is completely unavailable as far as I know.
There have been 6 audits of the Pentagon. They failed every one of them.
Okay, this question could be for either or both of you. Do you see any way out of this horror so well described short of a revolutionary change? How do you evaluate the possibility of revolution given what we are as a world are what we and the world's people face?
Oh, okay, I'll go first. Awesome question. I really love this one. I hope that the answer is yes. But I suppose a bit more pragmatically, I would say what Steve said in his part of the presentation is completely correct. Labor organization is, I cannot think of something more immediate, more at hand, and more important that everyday Americans can get involved with. Organizing labor is a way that people can overcome their alienation, like that they are a single person with no political power. They can form relationships with the people who live and work with them, relationships that make political power, that can affect a material change in the world. Uh, and that's a grassroots organization to make change in the world that can use resources to hold people up the chain accountable. And I think that is one of the primary ways that we should think about affecting change on a like tomorrow and the next and throughout the coming months. As for revolution, well, I'm working on it.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I completely support and work on the issues of labor and bringing. We really have to come together as groups that are involved in one thing or another, but labor is central, and we have to think about the situation that workers are in, working class people are facing, and that has to be central. And if you think about the election, you can see that the lack of attention to working class issues, I think was a big reason for the loss of the Harris-Walz
Yes.
campaign. I thought when
Yes.
Walz came on board with his history, that there was a good chance that those would be front and center, but it didn't go that way.
Yeah, if we changed the terrain of labor power in this country, that would be revolutionary. That would be a complete shift in how power works. So I think that's the first step.
Another thing is internationalism. The Longshore Union here on the West Coast has done a whole lot of things over many years to, for peace and justice and shutting down ports for that. And they did it. They've done it in Barcelona and Genoa. They've stopped shipping of arms different times to Israel recent times. Spain had a 24-hour general strike. Israel had a 24-hour general strike. So thinking internationally is very important. We can't, if we don't think internationally, we're truncated. We're not going to be a revolution of action and thought isn't possible without thinking internationally.
We had protests at the port of Oakland. I think it was Zim shipping when they were trying to ship arms to Israel. Do you know if Zim stopped shipping from there, or whether it's just under the radar now and nobody knows? Or
I don't.
Okay.
Does somebody know?
Okay. We'll move on to another question. The structure and order of the military can be so useful with natural disasters and conservation. In other words, there are some positive things that the military can do. Do you see that as even happening? I mean, I guess that means happening with regard to addressing some of the devastation you've described. Could the military be a force for good to solve some of the horror they've created?
Well, I think the National Guard has done that a lot of times. With floods and things like that, they've gone out. It's been quite a mixed legacy because they've been used to put down revolts and strikes and in the 60s in the Black communities and stuff like that. But I think people actually joined the Guard to, that was some motivation to be of service, to help people in natural catastrophes. And then in the early part of this century, they got sent to sent to Iraq and Afghanistan, and then they got sent back again, and then they got sent back again. So they got betrayed in that sense of, but yeah, I mean, it can have, yeah, it's one role that has happened. Yeah.
I think, yeah, thank you. Steve has emphasized something that I didn't in my presentation that I think is important to say, and that's that when we think about the military, there is a difference between like the rank and file and the people who are in charge of it. And when I'm talking about like we should be suspicious of the military, we need to be more critical of this institution. I'm not necessarily talking about the rank and file, not that I want to abdicate their responsibility for militarism, but like the staff that run the military are a different kind of wickedness. And so can do I think that it's possible that like National Guard infrastructure could be utilized to help people in a disaster? Yeah, I think that's possible. I do think that they will be something that is going to be mobilized as disasters become increasingly frequent here in the United States. However, I don't think we should want that. I think that we like these are people with guns who serve other interests than just ours. And they take orders, and those orders don't come from us. Like we need to think about how we can build grassroots power and bottom up structures that can help us and disarmed structures also that can help us uh, uh, weather these disasters so that military power is not our first recourse. Like I said, we are under a different administration now, and it wants to use the military against us. This should be a time when we are saying demilitarize, disarm, rather than like trying to find the good, the little like flecks of diamond in the piles of coal here.
The next set of questions relate more to the dynamics of the conflict over there and less to ecology and the military. For the sake of clarity, can you explain the difference between a ethno-state versus a settler colonial state? I think you used the term ethno-state a few times in your talk.
Yeah, I think I used both terms. So when I call Israel a settler colonial state, I mean that they are practicing colonialism now. They are actively trying to colonize the areas around them, which, like I said, I don't put much stock in international law. So like, but technically, according to it, what they are doing is settling areas outside of their national sovereignty. So they're a settler state in that sense. They're an ethno state in the sense that their policy is to serve like a certain kind of ethnicity that they are working to define. Like an Israeli, like citizenship in Israel is meant to be a restrictive process to a certain kind of person. And this may be the case with nation states anywhere, right? Like every nation state may be trying to like restrict down who gets to be counted as a citizen. That's the point of the quote from our current president-elect that I brought up. But so they settle, they support, or they base themselves on an ethnic identity, and so a settler ethno-state is what I call them.
Okay, this one's from Zoom, and I had to paraphrase because it was a bit long. It's more of a comment. Usually, a people who commit genocide do not command sympathy. In our age of enforced multicultural tolerance, will we be forced to feel sympathy when people turn against Israelis now that they mentioned psyops, which are out to seek us to convince that everything they do is criticism of it, I should say, is anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I could address that. Anti-Semitism is a very serious issue, and it has a long history, and and actual anti-Semitism has increased in the last few years, the last couple of years. Anti-Semitism gets weaponized by Netanyahu and right-wing people, many of them are actually not, many of them, some of them are Jews, some of them are Christian nationalists. There are apparently twice as many Christian Zionists as there are Jews in the world, is what I heard. There are like 30 million Christian Zionists and 16 million Jews in the world. So, yeah, so they act like if you're critical of Israel's policies, then you're being anti-Semitic. Well, that's a horrible position, and it kind of builds anti-Semitism, and it confuses people. I think anti-Semitism is actually a weapon designed to confuse people and to break up social movements, and it's been used in that way for a long time.
Yeah, my friend speaks my mind.
What? Oh,
He said you speak his
okay.
mind.
Okay.
Okay, we always hear release the hostages. Are we considering the 10,000 or more hostages, also called prisoners, that Israel has under administrative detention prior to October 23rd that were supposedly, there were 4,500 then, and now there are over 10,000. What about that? Any comment on that?
Abolish all prisons. Free all prisoners. That's my
We were
position.
here 2 weeks ago, then that was their message to us about closing prisons, by the way. Okay, does only the legislature have the ability to decide that the president of the US is not psychologically or physically able to serve as president? Can the generals weigh in on this
Oh
when
man.
he says to press the button because he got mad at somebody?
Oh, well, I think it's interesting. Steve mentioned the Flowers Revolution in Portugal, so it is sort of interesting to imagine, like, what would it be like if there were some kind of like liberal coup by the generals to like oust our president or something like that? Maybe could be. I'm not sure I would want to see it. But if anybody could institute a system of like near instantaneous nationalized healthcare, it should be the military. So if it happens, maybe at least we'll get some free healthcare.
All right, this one is specifically about Vice President-elect Vance. Do you see VP-elect Vance as the protective wall so that DT will not be found to be emotionally or physically incapable of being the president?
Who knows? Who knows? Who knows the actual vice president, right?
Yeah.
Is it Steve Bannon or Elon Musk, Stephen Miller? Or...
Yeah, I mirror Steve's thoughts here. This is like the question seems to presume, who knows like what Trump's desires are, what his like intention as a head of state is. Like this whole institution is such a mess of like competing interests and different powers. It's hard for me to say like what any one power is. Vance seems like a goon. I don't know. He's going to do something terrible. Who knows what?
So the Pentagon just failed their 7th annual audit. Do you think that Elon Musk's new government accountability project will target the Pentagon for their waste? I added that, by the way, to the question.
The laughs were your answer.
Yes, Comrade Elon is going to go in there and straighten these generals out. He's going to be the one, definitely.
The DoD budget included in total budget presented to the US citizens. I've heard no, it should be separate. Thus, the request to cut the DoD benefits may be more dollars. Sorry, I don't really understand this question, but maybe you did. Is the DoD budget included in the total budget presented to US citizens? That's the question.
No.
They've heard that no, it is not.
No.
So it flies under the radar, essentially.
No, but I mentioned the interest on the national debt, and then there's things there was overseas contingency operations. It seems to have been stopped, but that was all separate from DoD as well, and that was about 80 billion, I think.
Do you expect Biden's, did you have another answer?
Oh, I was just going to say, I hate to get too conspiratorial here, but one of the things I was trying to describe in my presentation is that a part of the Pentagon's operation is business, is making money. And so, I think that something worth considering when we're imagining the Pentagon budget is that they make revenue also. There's a lot of money that they have that's just completely unaccountable. It's not a part of budget. It's just being generated by whatever it is that they do and used for whatever purposes. So, I mean, like questions about will we audit the Pentagon? Do we know how much their budget is? No, we can't know. Like, there's so much money swirling around this institution coming from from CIA selling opium that they grow in Afghanistan. It's just like it's impossible to know how much money this place actually has or where it's going.
Okay, we're going to do two more questions, and then we're going to save a minute for a couple of announcements as we close the meeting. Do you expect Biden's presidential legacy to be rightfully tarnished by having orchestrated and funded this genocide, or will it just be ignored in favor of economic policies like passing the IRA, chips, etc.?
Depends who's doing the ignoring and the recording of history, I guess.
What should we do as citizens, individuals? What are the most effective actions that we can help bring about some of the hopeful changes that you talked about, Ian? Either of you could answer this, right?
Okay, I'm going to mention an action that we could take this week, I think. So Monday was Armistice Day, we like to call it, Veterans Day, they like to call it. We had an action from the Embarcadero, about 400 or 500 people. It was faith communities. Maybe some of you were there. I don't know. Faith communities, immigrant rights, labor, and veterans. So I was on the organizing call for the veterans. And so we went by the Palace Hotel where they were on strike. Joined that rally. Went to LaPonza Butler's office briefly, then went to Alex Padilla's office on Bush Street, and we had the road blocked off, and we had talks, and people sat in civil disobedience and street art. No more weapons, and so, but we've heard that. So it's to ask the senators to support not sending the $20 billion to Israel, military money. So this is Bernie Sanders introduced it. It's the first time this has come up for the Senate. So we're asking them to support that. And we're not sure what they're going to do. But we think the vote will be on Wednesday. That's what I hear. So I think there's likely to be an action Tuesday, maybe a candlelight vigil or something. Dolores, can I send you information? You have emails for some of these people, so I think we're going to I'll send it to the veterans, and something's going to happen. So I think something can happen Tuesday if you're willing to be.
We need to stay in the streets, basically, huh? For the long term. Don't get exhausted. Stay in the streets.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we
can
should.
I follow up?
Yeah.
Okay. Steve mentioned no moss in San Francisco. There's an effort against your local military air shows. That's an important project to get involved in because that does everything that we've been talking about here. It's concern for the environment and it's concern for the culture of militarism the U.S. Fosters. Steve also mentioned labor power. Get involved with your local union if you've got one, and do your best to support them. I know that I'm here representing the Veterans for Peace, and so far be it for me to advertise another local group. And look, I don't think these guys are perfect, but check out your local DSA chapter. Going to meetings is good. It's a way that you can meet people who are politically concerned around you and find projects like community gardens or other kinds of direct community aid that are going to make an impact on your local scene. And in San Francisco, I'm sure there's a big DSA. Like I said, they're not perfect, They're not the only place that I like to organize with, but it's a fine starting point.
So yeah, just let me say, if you're interested in maybe working on the No Mas campaign, the No Military Air Shows, and it will be next October. It's always Fleet Week in October here in San Francisco. So talk to me and I'll get your email address and you can get on the list of organizing for that.
Definitely. I think that'd make a good forum talk, by the way, possibly. Okay, thank you very much. And Bruce is going to do an announcement in a second. I just want to say in this room at 12:30, the Social Justice Forum will be happening, and we invite you to come back for that. Dolores and I will be talking there a little bit about Gaza and Palestine there. We're not having forum next week, but in 2 weeks, we'll be back with Bob Bacon on the death penalty, or I should say abolition of the death penalty.
Thank you all for inviting me to speak here. It was very nice to have this conversation with y'all.
Yeah, I also want to thank the Vets for Peace for all that they do. For this presentation, it was a very powerful presentation. I learned a great deal. I think that the comments about Gaza and the effects it's having, what the military is having on the climate is extraordinarily important, and we've got a lot of work on our hands to protect ourselves and protect the society, protect the world, change the world. Anyway, in light of that comment, there's a meeting going to be taking place tonight in Berkeley. There was a message that was put out. One of many messages that have been put out by a revolutionary theorist and activist by the name of Bob Avakian. His message number 102 was called "Two Countries Within This Country, and the Whole Damn System's Got to Go." This is not a time for demoralization and despair. It is a time for righteous anger and revolutionary determination. And I have copies of this if you want to read it. The point is that the meeting tonight in Berkeley is going to be to discuss his comments and the implications of them. And because it's a very kind of like determined message that we're going to stand up to the threat of fascism, we're not going to be cowed by it. We're going to resist. We're going to continue to keep our eyes focused on the possibility of a better world, all those kinds of things. The MAGA fascist types have threatened the meeting. I think that the idea here is that now that Trump is in power, we should all be cowed and frightened and silent. And this is not what's going to happen. It's not what's happening. And I think that they are going to jump out and try to intimidate us. Anyway, so they've threatened this meeting. And so I would just say that's a challenge to us to stand up and defend those who are being attacked. This goes back to, the history back in the 30s and 40s when the idea that first they come for one group or they come for another, you've got to stand up and defend those groups, even if they are not yours personally, that we have to, so I would just call in all of us to those who can go to Revolution Books tonight, stand with the people there, and show that the MAGA types that we're not going to back down. This happened, you may recall, in 2017, that they came to San Francisco and they came to Berkeley and people mobilized against them. And I think this is the kind of spirit that we have to have now again in the face of all this. Did you want to say something? Yeah. Okay, it's 2444 Durant Street, Berkeley. It's Revolution Books. Okay, that's it. Thank you.